Hi guys, welcome to the latest podcast of YarninBlak. Today I actually have a great friend on, Rueben Berg. But before I introduce him to you, I just wanted to acknowledge the traditional custodians of the land that I'm currently calling in from. I'm here in Baldwin Q on the land of the Wurundjeri people. I'd like to pay respect to their elders past, present and emerging. I'd like to acknowledge any Aboriginal people that have joined us today, and I'd also like to acknowledge Rueben. So Rueben, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Cool. Would you like just to let our listeners know who you are, where you're from?
Yeah, absolutely. So my name's Rueben Berg. I'm a proud Gunditjmara man. So my family comes from Framlingham, but spent most of my life here in Naarm. And I'm currently one of the co-chairs of the First Peoples Assembly of Victoria.
Cool. So let people know, what exactly is the First Peoples Assembly?
Yeah, so the First Peoples Assembly is a democratically elected group of Victorian traditional owners, and we have responsibility for negotiating statewide treaty here in Victoria.
Yeah. Why is the treaty so important?
I think there's lots of reasons why treaties are important. To me, the biggest thing around treaty is the capacity to reset the relationship between the Victorian government and First Peoples here in Victoria. It's a chance to, address some of the things that have happened in the past and say, you know what, things haven't gone well, and we want to kind of have a reset. And treaty is a way of resetting that relationship.
Yeah. What was the process that was involved to get onto that treaty assembly?
Yeah, so there's been two set of elections now to join the assembly. It first started back in 2019, and there are two ways you can become a member of the assembly. You can run as a member within your region. So there are 5 regions. So that's what we call kind of the general member within election. So you're voted for by members of the Aboriginal and Torres community who live within your region. So lots of people nominated, and then everyone gets to see who's put their hand up, and everyone votes for who they think. And then there's a certain number from each region who gets selected. But you can also be selected by your recognised traditional owner group. So for those traditional owner groups who have formal recognition, they each get those traditional owner groups. There's 11 of them. They get to have their own process, self-determined, whatever process they determine to choose their representative. They will choose a representative, and that brings us to currently 32 members of the assembly.
Wow, 32. That's a big number.
Sure is, yeah.
Yeah. So how were you elected?
I've actually done it both ways. So the first term, I ran as a candidate in the metro region and was successful. And then this second term, I had an opportunity to be the representative for Eastern Mar. So I went down that path. So I've actually gone through both methods.
Okay. So what's your daily routine like involved in the assembly? What do you exactly do?
Yeah, so as a co-chair, my role's full-time alongside Negara Murray, and I go to lots and lots and lots of meetings. So we have internal meetings where we try and discuss what our strategies are around with other members, how we want to approach treaty. I have internal staff meetings about how we want to progress the decisions we've made as a chamber. I have meeting with community groups about what their aspirations are. And then I'll have meetings with government agencies about how they're progressing and what we can do to influence some of the work that they're doing. So it's a lot.
Yeah. So how long's the tenure for being a member?
Yeah, it's a 3-year term as a member. And so we had the first term was 3.5 years, I think, and then this next term is 3 years.
Yeah. Have we seen any progress occurring?
Absolutely, we have. So the first term of the assembly was not about negotiating treaty. It was actually about negotiating a process for treaty. Because we've never had treaties here, it's a bit of an unknown about what that should look like. So we actually had to work out the process to negotiate treaty. And so in that first term, we had great success in negotiating with the government for the establishment of the Treaty Authority, which is the independent umpire that's going to oversee negotiations. We established the Self-Determination Fund, which is a pool of resources to support traditional owner groups to be ready to negotiate treaty. And we also agreed with government on the treaty negotiation framework. And that's the rule book of how treaty will work here in Victoria, how you go about negotiating treaty. So all those things were negotiated by the first term of the Assembly. And now in this second term, we're looking to use those things we've put in place alongside the Yuruk Truth and Justice process that we also advocated for to actually start, hopefully in the next couple of months, start statewide treaty negotiations.
Cool. Is there a time frame of when we will have treaties?
Yeah, look, there's no fixed time frame. We've seen in other countries it can take decades. That's not our plan here. Our plan is to kind of break treaty up into different kind of chunks. So rather than waiting for every little part of a treaty to be formalized and agreed to, we're going to break it up and say, well, if we can agree on this part of it, let's have a treaty about that and then implement that and then start negotiations on the next part. So I'm hopeful that within the next 2 years, we have some really strong treaty outcomes. There'll be many more after that, but there'll be some outcomes within the next 2 years.
Yeah. What's been the most, or what's been some of the challenges or barriers that you guys have faced in this process?
Yeah, well, for starters, when the Assembly first started, that was December 2019. And so not long after that, we came to March 2020, which, as we'll recall, was when the COVID started. So that was our very first part of the chamber, just getting to know each other. And then we could never see each other again in person. So that was a huge challenge and couldn't see community either. The other thing is, as you said, 32 members. It's not easy to get 32 people to come together in a room and agree on stuff. And we have some really strong, robust conversations. But we all have the same interests. We all want to see better outcomes for our community. So that's always the kind of guiding light in how we progress through conversations. The state themselves, they've actually been pretty strong in terms of wanting to come to the table and have these conversations. I guess maybe I had low expectations, but I've been fairly impressed with the state about how willing they are to want to come and have these conversations. So that hasn't been too much of a challenge. I think it's just the complexity of it all. Like, this is not a simple thing we're trying to do. It's a really complicated thing. And so trying to make sure that we can break that down in a way that community can understand and feel like they're coming along with the journey with us, that's one of the challenges. And then also trying to get the bureaucracy of government to change the way they do business, of not just deferring to business as usual.
Yeah. Do you think community understand the process that you're describing?
To an extent, and I think there's some community members who've been, I know, have been to every single session that we run to engage people. And there's some people who turn up for the first time and don't really know what's going on. So I think there's varying degrees of understanding. And our goal is to just make sure that we provide as many opportunities as possible so that people who are in our community who do want to find out about it have an avenue to come and find out about it. And that's really, really important to have those opportunities.
Yeah. That's good. Thank you for explaining that. I think not everybody that would be listening does have a really good understanding of the process and how people were elected. And I think you gave a good understandings to that. A couple of other questions. Where did you grow up?
So I grew up over in the western suburbs in Essendon and Ascot Vale, over that side of town. Yeah.
Yep. And you went to school I don't name the school, but you actually finished. Did you finish year 12?
Yeah. I loved school. School was, I think, a really powerful thing for me. I thought, my dad always said education was really, really important and instilled that in me from an early age. And I thrived at school. So I was very fortunate in that way. Finished year 12 and went on to study architecture.
Oh, cool. So did you enjoy architecture?
No. Okay. Hence I'm not an architect.
Yeah. So you actually finished the whole degree in architecture?
I have a bachelor's degree in architecture, from the University of Queensland. Yeah.
So after you finished your architecture, what did you decide to do then?
So I'd moved up to Brisbane to study architecture because my mum had moved up there and my little sister. So I was hanging out with them up there. But I knew I wanted to come back home to Naarm. And I got my degree and I'd been working for government in the Department of Housing. And I found out about the Commonwealth graduate program for Indigenous graduate program. So if you had a degree, you could work for government. And so I applied for that and I said, I'll work for any department that's based in Melbourne. I don't really care what department I work for. And so I got a gig in the Department of Employment and Workplace Relations. And that move got me back down to Melbourne.
While you were at school, how much Aboriginal studies did you actually learn at school?
Not a heap. There was some stuff. I was very fortunate that my dad, having been the Koori Heritage Trust and the Melbourne Museum for a long, long time, I got my education through him mostly. But yeah, there were small patterings of it here and there, but it wasn't a strong focus at all at school.
So you've got kids.
Mm.
One question I'm going to ask you is, how much Aboriginal studies are they learning from school, and has it changed?
Definitely more than when I was at school. Absolutely. It's definitely changing, and I see that the school my kids go to is very keen to try and embed as much as possible. And I've offered up to come along and talk to students. So I talk to all different year levels at least once a year. I come and have a chat about the various things that I'm doing and impart some of that understanding from my perspective. So I think it's definitely growing. I think there's still scope, and I think treaty is one of those areas where we can hopefully embed some of that stuff. So it's not just the schools that choose to want to do it, but there's a really strong structure about what schools have to do around ensuring that our culture and our knowledge about our history is understood by all Victorians.
Yeah. A buzzword that's going around, it's been going around for a little while, is about reconciliation. What does reconciliation mean to you?
Yeah, it's an interesting one. I think I'm not sure where we are in the phase of reconciliation now. I think it was a really critical discussion to have. And to me, it's about the reconciling of the past, the coming together and recognizing, especially from a non-Indigenous perspective, a reconciling of what has happened in the past and trying to work out the ways that we can make amends for that, essentially. And I see treaty as kind of the next much stronger phase of that, really. That reconciliation is, it's almost one dominant party saying, oh, we're going to kind of try and be nice to you, is one way of looking at it. And I think treaty is a way of saying, actually, no, this is about we're both equals within this society and we're going to work out how we want to work together. And that's where I see the change happening now.
Yeah. Elders in community, what makes an elder?
That's a good question. We've been grappling with that with the Assembly because we have part of our structure is we have an elder's voice where we ensure that we can get the guidance and wisdom from elders. And in all the conversations we had with communities around that was we weren't going to come up with a definition of an elder. It was going to be up to communities themselves to define an elder. And I think that's the right way to do it. I don't think you self-select as an elder. I think it's something that your community that you're a part of recognizes you as an elder based on your life experience, your wisdom, your standing within that community. And that's how eldership is bestowed within our communities.
Yeah, because we do have self-appointed elders at times. How do you make sure that their voices don't dominate the other elders?
Yeah, look, that's a real tricky one. And as I said, I think the strongest form of eldership is when it has been your community has recognized you in that role. And in any kind of forum, if there is someone dominating conversations, I think that's something that needs to be considered, and you need to make sure there's space for other people to have their voices heard. And sometimes that might just take a personal one-on-one conversation with someone of saying, and in a nice way, I really value your contributions, but I want to make sure that other people have a chance to have their contributions as well. That can be a powerful way to try and address some of that.
Yeah. Well, another buzzword that's around is truth telling. What's the difference between storytelling or history telling and truth telling?
Yeah, I guess in some ways they are very related. We're looking specifically through a truth telling through the Yuruk process, which is about really enabling community to come forward and tell their stories about some of the things that have happened in the past that have had oftentimes, sadly, quite a harmful impact on our communities across generations. So it's being able to share your truth about what individuals have experienced, what those things from the past have impacted. But it's also really powerful, that sense of truth telling, I think, in getting the broader community to really actually understand and grapple with what has happened in the past for First Peoples. And that those aren't just things that happened some long time ago and they don't impact on anything today, but they are things that still happened quite recently and are still occurring today, sadly, in some circumstances, and are still having a direct impact on how people are living their lives. And so that truth-telling component is about, I think, giving open air to some of those things that have happened rather than having it kind of hidden away and not discussed. It's opening it up and shining a light on it, and that enables you to heal when that light is shined, I think.
Are you seeing success stories happening already with truth telling?
Yeah, I think the very act of being able to people to tell their truths is powerful, and the fact that we have, and I'm talking about this through the Uruk process in particular. There are other forms of truth-telling as well, of course. But the very fact that the government was willing to say, yes, let's have essentially a royal commission about First Peoples and what's happened, I think is a really powerful outcome in itself, that we have a government willing to do that. We'll see how willing they are to actually listen to what the recommendations are and what's come from that. But I think it shows a maturity of us as a state, that we're willing to try and have those conversations, and that we have a government that is prepared to invest in that sort of process.
Yeah. So besides Victoria, is there any other states or territories that are actually talking about treaties or truth-telling?
There were many more before the referendum. Sadly, post-referendum, we've seen some backtracking in those states and territories that had made some progress there. I think there's still conversations happening in Queensland, but it no longer has bipartisan support. In South Australia, though, they're undergoing a process for their voice. They legislated a voice in South Australia, and so they're going to have an election very shortly to determine who their voice is going to be in South Australia. So that's really fantastic to see that progressing. And we're hopeful that if we can demonstrate this model that we've got here, where we are tackling all three aspects, we've got voice, we've got treaty happening, and we've got truth-telling happening. If we can demonstrate that that is a way to go forward, that it can be successful, that it's nothing to fear, there's nothing to worry about, I'm hopeful that other states and territories will be able to follow along in that path, knowing that they're going to need to do things differently. Every state and territory's got their own ways they need to do things, but hopefully we can demonstrate that it's not something you have to shy away from.
Yeah, I think that's what we need. We need more states to pick it back up, I believe. And yes, South Australia, how far away are they from the elections, did you say?
I think it's middle of March they're happening.
Oh, so, wow.
Yeah.
Wow. And is their process of election similar to what we did here in Victoria?
Yeah, I think they've just got different regions, and they're voting. People are voting within their regions for representatives, and then within each region, they will nominate two co-chairs from within those regions, and then that will form a larger council at a statewide level.
Yeah, cool. Another buzzword that's been around for a little while is cultural safety. And my question to you is, what makes you feel culturally safe as an Aboriginal man wanting to access services like health services or education or employment?
Yeah, I think there's not one thing that helps with cultural safety. I think it's a multitude of different things. And I think it starts off with that a visual presence is the first starting point. And whether that's a flag flying, whether that's artwork, whether that's seeing other Aboriginal people within that service, there's a visual element to that cultural safety, but that's only one part of it. You can have all that and still be completely culturally unsafe, but it's an important starting point to have that cultural safety. It's then not just having a one-size-fits-all approach of recognizing that there are going to be different ways that different communities are going to want to do things, and not just making broad assumptions that either you're going to be like everybody else, or that because you're Aboriginal, you need this, this, and that. That's also not culturally safe to just have those stereotypes. So those are some of the things I think that are important around that. And it's just that I always think it's interesting that there's this balance between what we strive for as First Peoples is we want to be treated like everybody else, but also respected for our difference. And it's finding that appropriate balance between those things that I think creates cultural safety.
Yeah. The terminology is really important as well. And we seem to, well, in areas where I work, I do cultural awareness training as well. You know, we've got First Australians, First Peoples, First Nations, Aboriginal, Indigenous. Mm-hmm. What is the most appropriate term to use, or why have the Assembly gone to First Peoples?
Yeah, look, it's a great question. It was actually decided before the members joined. It was a decision made by the Victorian Treaty Advancement Commission. Auntie Jill led that process, and there was a whole engagement with community about what that meant. And that was the term that they chose for that. And I would say that personally, I hadn't used that term very much prior to joining the Assembly. But since having joined it, I use it frequently now, and I find it's a useful term, partly because I know that often a default here in Victoria has been to just use the term Aboriginal, and that then doesn't include Torres Strait Islanders as part of that. And by saying First Peoples, that is a more abbreviated way, instead of saying Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander, which just pragmatically is a mouthful to say every single time. So First Peoples is an easier and more simple way of saying those sorts of things. I think it's also got value in terms of it's more descriptive about who we are. We are the First Peoples of this place, and so I find it useful in that way. But I don't. Yeah, I'm happy with all the different terms, and I think oftentimes as a collective, First Peoples is a useful term. When you're talking about someone as an individual, I think it's much better to refer to the particular groups that they are part of. So I prefer to call myself a Gunditjmara person rather than an Aboriginal person. Or I wouldn't describe myself as a First Nations person. I'd say I'm Gunditjmara. And so I think there's that distinction between describing a collective and describing individuals.
So tell us a little bit about your work career after not getting into architecture or going into architecture. How did you end up where you are now? Give us a plotted history.
Yeah, absolutely. So, studied architecture, got on the graduate program, and so I was working in the Commonwealth Government in the Department of Workplace Relations. So I was actually, I don't know if you remember Work Choices.
Yes.
Yes. So I the first 3 months you have to it's an initiation, it seems, when you work in the graduate program. You had to work on the phones for Work Choices. So on a phone bank where people would ring up to say, how much should I earn as a hairdresser? How much annual leave am I supposed to have? My boss says, blah, blah, blah. What is that true? And so I'd have to answer all those sorts of questions. So I did that for 3 months, and that was really boring and horrible. And then moved on from there into the Indigenous employment program and really enjoyed working in that space, trying to support community and employment. Then I went across to the state government to Aboriginal Affairs, Victoria, as it was then, and worked in their infrastructure program, just doing administrative work. And then kind of got tapped on the shoulder and said, would I like to apply to be one of the managers of the Metropolitan Heritage Programs area, which kind of drew a little bit from my architectural kind of planning knowledge, but also from my experience with my dad around cultural heritage. And so got that role, which was, I probably wasn't ready for that role when I took it, but I kind of took the chance and really enjoyed having that role as a manager within government there. But at the same time, I was also then starting to do some leadership work and try and progress myself as a leader, and went to a program that was run by Dwayne Vickery, who is an amazing facilitator. And I was really inspired by the facilitation work that he did, and had an opportunity to kind of run some workshops through my work, and really, really loved that, really loved running workshops. And so after 10 years of working in government, transferring my long service leave from Queensland to Commonwealth to the Victorian government, I took long service leave at 32, which I was very fortunate to be able to do, and decided to set up my own business running workshops. And that was a really amazing thing to be able to do. It was a big risk to leave a permanent government job to go and start running my own business, but took that leap of faith with support of my family. And then that freed me up to also take up other opportunities. So at the time, that then freed me up to take on board roles. So I started applying for government roles on boards. So I got some roles in the water sector, in the heritage sector, and so got to really understand what good governance was about from a government perspective, and how the government works and how you can influence government and make decisions within government. And it was at that time that the Assembly elections opened up. And I thought, I'll put my hand up. I've got some of these skills that I think are useful, knowing how government works, having experience making decisions. And so applied for the Assembly and then got that gig. And now here I am full-time in the co-chair role.
Oh, that's pretty amazing. And along the way, you also won the Victorian Indigenous Emerging Leader Award. And I'm not sure what year it was. What year was that in?
That would have been 2012, I think. Yeah, that was a really important part of that process as well, because that was around when I just left government, and that was when I was still had some architectural focus actually, and was doing some work with Indigenous architects, and so that was really powerful having that support from the fellowship, and how I got to know you as well through the fellowship.
I was going to ask you, what was your platform, or what did you do in that year that you were the emerging leader?
Yeah, so the particular project I was working on was around the Indigenous Architects Association. So trying to get more young people to think about architecture as a career. And so I organised some an event, a workshop for young kids to come and learn more about what architecture was about, and how the role of Aboriginal people within architecture. I organised some gatherings of Indigenous architects from all across and designers from all across the country, and just really did some work to kind of promote that association and kind of build up the profile. And it's now got a life of its own, which I'm really proud to say. It's now become a national body, and there's a whole another suite of people stepped up to be part of that, which is great to see. But yeah, I don't have time for that anymore.
A question: how many Aboriginal architects are there that you're aware of?
Yeah, well, when I was starting that, so back in 2012, I think the number was about 10 at most.
Yeah.
And I think that's well improved now. So I think this would be a guess, but I think there's at least 20 to 30 now, which is really amazing.
Oh, wow. That's a double, triple.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, no, it's going gangbusters, I think so.
I've got a couple of final questions for you, but one of them is, if I could give you $1 zillion and a magic wand and said that you could change something in Aboriginal affairs in Australia, where would you start? What would you do?
Well, it's treaty is where I would start, to be honest. And what I would continue to do, what we're trying to do now, which is basically the easiest way to describe it, is in the various states and territories, we have a minister for Aboriginal people or for First Peoples or whatever the case may be. In Victoria, what we're trying to do, and what I would hope to have occur in every state and territory nationally, is that those powers of the Minister for Aboriginal Affairs actually get transferred to Aboriginal people. That it's not elected officials within the government that make those sorts of decisions. We have our own process to elect our leader, and that is the person who gets to make, those are the people who get to make the decisions the government currently makes around First Peoples. And I think that will have a flow-on effect across all sorts of areas to lead to better outcomes.
Yeah, cool. Another question I've got is, there's a lot of people just finding out about their Aboriginality and don't know where to start and don't know where to progress. What advice would you give those people?
Yeah, I think it's really powerful for people to be able to do that. And you need to understand where it is that you're from, because I think that's an intrinsic part of Aboriginality. And unfortunately, not everybody can always do that. But if you can find out exactly where it is that you're from and connect to that place, visit that place and think about it from an Aboriginal lens, think about it as you're standing on the place where your ancestors have lived for countless generations beforehand. Develop that connection, connect to your family who are also from that area. That's the best way to start, I think, unpacking that.
I think that's good advice. My last question is, what key messages would you like people to walk away with from our yarn this morning?
I think absolutely, for members of the community who are listening, if you're interested in treaty, find out. There's a lot of information out there. Don't sit back and have it happen. Be involved. We need all of our community to be involved. And if you're listening as a member of as an ally, advocate for treaty. Talk to your local government and your local representatives and say you think treaty is important, because if we do that, we're going to get it.
Cool. Before we go, you mentioned allies there. What makes a good ally?
I think what makes a good ally is elevating the voices of First Peoples. So not speaking on behalf of First Peoples, but amplifying the voices of First Peoples. And one of the things I've been talking to allies a bit about lately, actually, is trying to make sure that allies think about, why are these sorts of things, why is closing the gap, why is treaty important to them? Not why is it important to Aboriginal people, not why does it help Aboriginal people, why are these things important for allies themselves? Because if they can have those sorts of conversations with other people, that can make more allies, I think. So why is it that these things are important, not to Aboriginal people, but why are they important to you as an ally?
Yeah, I think that's a good reflective question that allies should be asking. Well, I know I'm watching the time, and I know it's time that we have to go. I want to say, Rueben, thank you for hanging with us today. It's always a pleasure to talk to you. I should catch up with you a little bit more, but absolutely, I know that you're busy and I've been busy. So even to schedule this, had to go through go through a PA to get to you now. So guys, I want to say thank you for joining us today. And I want to say thank you for Rueben for joining us. So thanks, mate. And you know how much I really care for you.
Thanks, mate.
So
You too.
Talk to you guys soon. See you guys at the next podcast.